Welcome to the Beer Taster's Notebook, the show dedicated to learning about beer. I'm Jonathan Thompson, advanced cicerone, beer judge, home brewer, and beer writer. Welcome back to the Beer Taster's Notebook, episode 6, Aroma. Okay, so I originally set out to make this episode an all-encompassing look at aroma. Halfway through, I realized we'd be here for hours, if not weeks, so I've decided to split it up into multiple episodes. It also makes it much easier for anyone studying this stuff to reference specific sections as opposed to trying to listen to 4 hours and figure out where I was talking about what. So part one, we're going to just do a general overview of aroma. That's today. The basic what and how, and then some sort of macro views of the molecular compound families responsible for beer flavor and aroma. And then parts 2 through 9 million, we'll just break those families down, starting probably with yeast-derived aromas. Okay, so let's roll. So aroma, smell, odor, it's the major basis of flavor, as we have discussed in episode 3. So just a quick overview of aroma and you. So orthonasal refers to smelling through the exposed part of the nose, which I guess is a silly way of just saying nostrils. In other words, it's you sniffing your beer or your coffee or whatever it is that you're ingesting. Retronasal refers to the aroma molecules entering from behind the nose, right? So through the mouth and then up through the back of the throat. And this, of course, is the foundation of flavor because that combines with taste and mouthfeel and all the rest. So aroma molecules will bind to the olfactory receptors in the olfactory epithelium. A signal is sent to the olfactory bulb. The signals are organized and then sent to the limbic system, of which the amygdala is key in processing emotions, and the hippocampus, memory formation and storage. Information makes its way to the olfactory cortex, where the identification and interpretation happens. In other words, one sniff of a fresh cake is going to fire a signal and get a positive emotional response and a fond memory of festive times, maybe. And the process output is that this is cake. A steaming pile of dung likely elicits a different reaction, albeit through the same pathways, although I can't speak for everyone. This output is called the odor image or object. It is often not the result of one molecule either, but rather many combined molecules to create that specific interpretation. This, of course, all leads to the idea that maybe what I smell isn't what you smell, but of course that's a subject for armchairs and fireplaces. So on to the responsible molecules, and a little bit of chemistry here. So for a molecule to be smellable, it requires a certain degree of hydrophobicity. In other words, it has a dislike or fear of water. And the most obvious example of hydrophobicity is oil and water. You pour a little bit of oil into a glass and it's not going to blend in, right? It won't dissolve. It just kind of floats around in there. So the molecule also needs to be volatile, and this means it has enough vapor pressure, which is how likely it is to transition to a gas state, and have relatively weak intermolecular forces. If you recall Chem 101, a stronger force is going to pull the atoms more closely together, which determines the state of matter, solid, liquid, gas. So these molecules are floating around in the air, are drawn into the nose, and latch on at the appropriate receptor. Now, the world of odors is absolutely mind-bending. I mean, first of all, some of the nomenclature is incredible. Scatol is a member of the indole family that is common in, animal feces or scat. Cadaverine is a diamine that smells like cadavers. And, hopefully you won't be encountering any of these in your beer. So let's move on to what we really need to know. So the aromas in your beer come from several sources, and we're just talking about desired aromas for now because we're going to have to do off flavors a little later on down the road. But malt, hops, and yeast and other microbes are the main contributors. Water to a degree can contribute some aroma, but it's the main three other inputs. And so, of course, the way the beer is treated was going to have obvious effects. Barrel aging can contribute a host of aromas and flavors, and obviously any additions to the beer. So if you put raspberry puree in the beer, presumably it's going to smell like raspberry puree, or at least raspberry something. The major aromatics we deal with are pyrazines and furans, lactones and esters, phenols and furanons, fatty and organic acids, aldehydes, ketones, fusel alcohols, terpenes, and terpenoids. So let's start with the malt. So typically malt aroma should be centered around the grain itself. Most of the aromas are a result of kilning and roasting. So pale malts would have a bread dough, raw flavor. Oh man, I'm channeling my grandfather's accent. Raw flour aroma. Gold or more yellow malts are going to have, sort of a, let's say a crackery, bready Aroma. Amber beers, there's a big range there. So the lighter ambers, you're going to look for like bread crust and digestive biscuit, to sort of toasted bread, and then moving into caramel and more pastry crust, the darker you get. I often find Weetabix in there, the Weetabix cereal. Brown beers move more towards the caramel. A kind of nutty, light chocolate and toffee qualities are very common there. And then some minor dark fruit characters can start to shine through. Black beers like stouts and porters made from the darker malts, I'm going to have those roasty, dark chocolate, coffee, and sometimes burnt aromas. And now let's just move on to yeast. So the yeast expresses many aroma compounds, mostly via secondary metabolic products. Fruity esters, sort of peppery phenols, and floral fusel alcohols are really all yeast derived. And then, of course, a bunch of off flavors too, like that buttery diacetyl and the eggy hydrogen sulfide. Thiols are sulfur compounds liberated by lyase enzymes in the yeast, and we'll get to those in a further episode. And then the most common of those is 4-mercapto for methylpentan 2-one for MMP. That's that blackcurrant caddy aroma associated with New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and certain New Zealand hops as well. So hops are really the workhorses of aroma, mostly from hydrocarbon fractions, but we get a boatload of aromas like spanning a vast array. So where the yeast esters may be confined to sort of fruity flavors and aromas, and the phenols are sort of spicy, peppery, and then, there's a few other pantry shelf items, the hops are just all over the place. So we can get everywhere from tropical fruit to cat pea to garlic to pine resin to a wet forest floor to dank, wood, mint, spice. I mean, again, it's going to be too consumptive to include all these for now. That would probably be a better subject for print, but we will deal with these shortly as well. So here are the major aroma components that you're going to find in beer. Isoamyl acetate is the ester responsible for that banana smell in Weiss beer. 4-vinyl guaiacol is the phenol responsible for the clove aroma in the same beer. It's also present in many Belgian ales. Hexyl acetate is a kind of an apple smell, while ethyl butyrate is pineapple. As we alluded to, 4-MMP is that blackcurrant cat pea smell. 3-mercaptohexanol, 3-MH is kind of like grapefruit and passion fruit. That's another New Zealand super special. And then, sticking sort of moving more into the hop world, the major components, myrcene is like it's kind of that resinous aroma. Humulene is a woody, spicy quality. Caryophyllene adds some spice as well. And farnesene is like a green, woody type of aroma. Beta-pinene, surprisingly, smells like pine, as does its alpha equivalent. And limonene smells a bit like, it doesn't smell a bit like, it smells like citrus, and it is a major component in many citrus fruits. And geraniol has a rose or a floral-like aroma. Just to deal with some of the off flavors, the major off flavors you're going to encounter in beer are often diacetyl, which is a diketone that smells like popcorn butter. Acetaldehyde, which is the source of much disagreement as far as the descriptor goes, but it's described as green apple, pumpkin guts, unripe avocado, and latex paint, amongst other things, which is that's an incredibly wide range of aromas, right? Chlorophenol smells like Band-Aids, and that's the result of a reaction with chlorine in the water and some polyphenols from the hops. Sulfur dioxide is that struck match smell. It's not always an off aroma, but in high quantities, it's pretty awful. And hydrogen sulfide, which smells like eggs or a hot spring, which is sometimes wanted and often not. It's more common in lagers for sure. It tends to volatilize off pretty quickly. Dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, that's another aroma with multiple conflicting descriptors, often touted as canned corn or vegetables, which is probably the most accurate and universal, but also strawberry jam or the seaside. It's the result of a boil that's not vigorous enough or too long a cooling period, and we'll talk about it in detail later on, but a lot of the potential acids in beer are hard to pick up as well without some tongue action, but butyric acid kind of smells like vomit. Isovaleric acid smells kind of like socks or cheese. Those are pretty easy to detect with your nose. So something really important to understand in aromas is the thresholds. So a lot of these compounds can live happily in your beer without any effect or any detection. It's only really when their levels reach a threshold and beyond that it actually matters. Of course, unless they're poisonous, but we're not talking about poisonous stuff. So below threshold means that we can't detect them at all. As far as our olfactory senses are concerned, they don't exist, or at least they don't matter. Okay, so let's move on to the act itself. So certain compounds are better detected orthonasally. Diacetyl is a great example, and some are much better suited retronasally, either just because of some salivary action, maybe some warming in the mouth, or combinations of other factors. So trans-2-nonanol is an aldehyde that smells like wet cardboard, and actually it's a really good example of retronasal. It's very difficult to detect in the glass, but once you swallow and that air rushes up the back of your throat, it's pretty hard to miss. And some maybe notes on the acts of smelling beer or sniffing your beer. So I'm a bit of a stickler for headspace. I really can't control, obviously, what goes on in bars and such, but at home, at Guinness being the only real exception, I drink out of a teku glass or a stemmed tulip glass, and I only ever fill it like half to 2/3 of the way. And so allowing this space for the volatiles to collect and mingle only really enhances your experience. Temperature matters a lot. A light lager at 11 degrees Celsius is not very appealing, but you're not going to get the more complex aromas from something like an imperial stout if it's sitting at 3 degrees centigrade. So you really want up to about 14 maybe is kind of, you're starting to get into unenjoyable territory once you go past 14 degrees. But, 11 to 14 is maybe 7 to 14. Let's say 7 to 14 is probably a good range for complex beers. You should swirl the glass like all the wine people do. That's going to get things started. So start by sniffing with the glass around chest height. Just give it a couple sniffs just to see what's coming out of the glass. In a colder and less complex beer, you're not going to, nothing's going to happen here, but it's just part of the act. Swirl it around again and then move the glass a bit closer. Some people kind of pass it under their nose and call it a drive-by. You can do that if you like, but just at least get it closer to your nose. Then swirl it again and get it right up in there. I mean, you can put your nose right in the glass, of course, because we're not filling it all the way, so there's no risk of drowning. And so a couple of short, hard sniffs, like a bloodhound. Then sort of try and consider what's happening and what you're detecting. Swirl it again. Take another long, deep sniff, again at close range, as long as you want this one. I mean, you might saturate the receptors, but so be it. I mean, it's all part of the process. And now repeat the entire operation from chest height, but each swirl, cover the glass with your hand while you're swirling it. Beer judges use a beer shield for this. It's just a piece of plastic that goes over top of the beer glass. Not only does it keep your hand dry if you get overly excited, but whatever odors are on your hands won't come into play. It also, it looks cool and professional. So I guess that's another thing just to mention, that if you're really serious about smelling and sampling and tasting beers, you want to eliminate all distractions. So no scented soaps or cologne or anything like that right before, or at least, any time before. It might sound a bit strange, but if you tried to listen to, say, Glenn Gould, that faint humming he does while he plays the piano, but you've got the blender going, the dog is barking, the smoke alarm's going off, the TV's blasting, kids are screaming, you're not going to hear it, right? Because everything's getting drowned out. So it's really sort of a signal to noise issue here. I guess what I'm basically saying is you want to be able to smell the volatiles coming off the beer and nothing else. You don't want any other interference. And that's it for today. So just a quick introduction to aromas, a quick introduction to the act of smelling, and we are going to start tackling the yeast produced aromas next, starting with fusel alcohols. And hopefully I won't get too carried away and we can fit it all into one episode. Not likely. Until next time, stay thirsty and stay curious.